Now, Northrop wrote another book, and this book was The Meeting of East and West. Yeah. And in this book, he refined his thinking. He kept going down that avenue of first and second function and intuition and postulation. And what he said in The Meeting of East and West was, and you can see my copy's been well tattered here. One day this will probably lose the cover of it, but a great book, a great read. It's on our bibliography. But what he said in this book was that concepts known by intuition he termed as first functional, and concepts we knew by postulation he called these second functional. And he drew this forward and he said, well then, if all of this is true, then some works of art are far more first functional and they're first function works of art, and some works of art are far more second functional, and he called these second function works of art. And he would say that our Liu-Fan here, this was a first functional work of art. Yeah. Now, this is the quote. I like to read you just a little bit of Northrop because he is actually one of the hardest philosophers to read. In graduate school, we were handed these books to delve because we were dealing with Eric Hawkins and his ideas and his aesthetics. So here's the quote. This is Northrop at his best. Art in the first function is to be defined as art, which uses the immediately apprehended aesthetic materials of the differentiated aesthetic continuum to convey those materials and that continuum in and for themselves for their own sake. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Let's look at Liu-Fan behind me and say, what does Northrop mean by that? That art in the first function, it's art. And it uses the immediately apprehended aesthetic materials. Now, when I said Liu-Fan chose this color black, that is an immediately apprehended aesthetic material. He chose that paint. Yeah, much in the same way a dancer would choose this movement, or a designer, a costume designer would choose a specific fabric. Yeah. Now, this is chosen, immediately apprehended aesthetic materials. Yes, this is what they are. And of the differentiated aesthetic continuum. So of all the things that we could choose and all the things that this black stroke could be, this is the one he chose. And he chose it to convey this material, this black, this choice, in and of itself and for its own sake. Yeah, that's kind of wonderful, that what we want to see is, look at this black stroke, look at that color, look at how that color meets this other color and floats on this third color, and look at the ghosting part and all of the parts that we talked about. So what are the choices that are made? Now, let's deal with the second function. Here's the quote again. Art in the second function, on the other hand, by the use of theoretically controlled and defined techniques, uses the aesthetic materials and the aesthetic continuum not merely in and for themselves for their own sake, but also analogically and symbolically to convey the theoretic component of the nature of things of which they are the mere epistemic correlate or sign. Okay, this is really wonderful, but you gotta take it apart in order to understand it and be able to digest it. Most of you, there might have been a place where it just started sounding like blah, 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 blah. But let's take it apart. This idea of the use of theoretically controlled and defined techniques. So we use techniques to get at something here. We use these materials and this continuum, not merely in and for themselves for their own sake. So this black slash is not in the second function is not just a black slash of paint. It's not just to look at that, but we use techniques for it to analogically and symbolically, that this becomes a symbol for something else. Now you can say in a painting like this that is so abstract, well, maybe this is not a symbol for something else. But we looked at Venus earlier. That paint is a symbol for something else. It's a symbol for Venus. We no longer just see the paint in and of itself for its own sake. We see the paint, and the paint is Venus. Yeah, it's showing us something that is symbolically and analogically something else, and it conveys the theoretical component of the nature of things. The nature of things being the nature of the world that we live in, the things that we know about the world of who is Venus, what does she stand for, why are we interested in that name and the ideas behind a goddess of love and beauty. And she is the epistemic correlate or sign. So epistemic meaning the thinking part, correlate, that we can correlate and think about it. She is the sign for that thing. So again, the black brushstroke means something else other than a black brushstroke. Now, someone could say, Liu Fan, he titled this Revelation, so we just see that this one stroke is a revelation. So maybe that is the second function component, but on its basic level, this is a black brushstroke. And what he wants us to look at and see here is not Venus, not something else, but see it. And maybe then ponder, what is a revelation? There's other Liu Fan paintings where there are two strokes, and he'll call it dialogue, where we'll see this relationship between these two objects kind of close and encountering each other. Some of his sculptures are also like that, where there is just two elements, simple things that he's interested in. And in Northrop's terms, Northrop would say he's a very first functional artist, rather than that. Now, getting back to Eric Hawkins, that was one of the things Eric was interested in, is making works that were far more first functional than second function. He didn't really want to tell big story ballets. He suddenly said, oh, I just want to live in this world of first function. And when I show you this range between first and second function, because there's lots of places we could be, and there's typical ways the dance world deals with pieces between first and second function, that'll be helpful to look at. And then some of you that know Hawkins would say, oh, now I get where his dance New Moon fits. It's in this flow between first and second function. So again, this wonderful, wonderful sense. Now, let me jump back, and we talked about this already, but if Northrop were looking at Piet Mondrian's Composition A and Botticelli's Birth of Venus, here he would probably say far more first functional. Let's just look at these colors in and of themselves for their own sake. And second functional, let's look at Venus. Yeah. Now, I sometimes like to say, there's times we can look at Mondrian and I can ask you, what is it, or what does it look like? And there's a part of humans, that's the part of us that likes to look at the clouds and see bunnies and see, it's like, oh my gosh, that looks like a dolphin diving that cloud. We want to make sense of things and say, can that symbolically be? So you can look at Mondrian's Composition A, and someone can say, oh, it looks like a city. It looks like buildings. It looks like streets. It looks like this. And I would say, yeah, maybe he was inspired by that, or maybe it does look like that. But also I would look at it and say, I think what he really wanted was just for us to appreciate the rectilinearness of these shapes and these primary colors. And they're really specific. If you know Mondrian, in this period, he really used these colors. He just didn't pick any colors. He was really specific in his choices. What Northrop we talked about in that place. So in its pure form, first function tends to be the not representational art. What some people call abstract. Abstract is a funny word. We're going to take it apart in language a little bit in our chapter on language. But I sometimes think abstract is kind of a strange word because most things, this black line is pretty concrete, that it just is what it is. It's a black brushstroke. So, but in the first function, what we're dealing with is an artist making a beautiful arrangement of choices, captivating organization, and doing it with the elements. And what they want us to see is how these elements come together. If you can imagine putting together a dance and saying, I don't care what it means, I just want you to see the movement. And I want you to live in the world of the movement of this piece. Far more first functional than if you say, I want to tell the story of Giselle. All right. Now, both are beautiful. I don't want to say that one is better than the other. And again, sometimes in my lecture, I'm pushing you to say, what is the first function? Now, the other thing, I'll say it here, I'll probably say it again. Giselle is beautiful in the first function. There are beautiful movements. There are beautiful elements in and of themselves that we can look at in and of themselves for their own sake. And Northrop, it's one of the reasons he wanted East to meet West here, is he wanted both to happen. So even when we look at a second function piece, we look at the beauty of the movements. And I would say that's the reason why a ballet person would say the movement is so different in Giselle than it is in Paquita. That these things they're very different, in how they feel. They're different in the first function. We'll look at that some more as well. Yeah. All right. Here's Brancusi's The Fish. Yeah. Modernist, modern sculptor, Russian. And you can say he could have put fins on this fish. He could have put a tail, but instead he just gave us the essence of that form that might be fish. Yeah. This is Klein. We're going to look at his blue painting later. This is Anthropomorphy, Princess Helen, 1960. And it's a beautiful, just blue color flow here. I sometimes talk about myself in this chapter and saying, I've made pieces that are very first functional. I've made pieces that are second functional. Probably the most first functional piece is a piece I'd made several years ago called Flow. And I only wanted people to see fluid movement, like water, blue, effortless, unending, relentless with momentum. Yeah, these elements. Here's a picture of that. And you can see even when I photographed it, I left the lens of the camera open because I wanted to capture the flow. My favorite pictures of this piece were not the ones that were stopped, but the ones that were where the movement flowed. And there was these images, these people standing while these other people moved. So those were great. I didn't want it to be about a specific pool of water, a specific place, a river. No, just flow. Yeah. Now, I also made another piece. You look at this picture and you see baseball. Yeah. What's interesting is someone would say that's the batter. And even without a bat there, we know from the form that this is not just a dance movement. Yeah. This is not just movement, that this means something else. And the uniform helps tell us that also. Uniforms are more second function. Yeah. The baseball piece was for 6 players. And there was a pitcher, there was a batter, so we can see parts of that. If I show you the picture of the 2 pieces next to each other, you would say, my brain works differently to take these 2 things apart. And that's one of the challenges, and that's one of the fun things about looking at works of art that are more first functional and abstract, and looking at works of art that are much more representational and second function.